My husband was sneaking around with his girl best friend, and then she sent me a message that she's pregnant with his child. My husband and I's only problem within our marriage has been his best friend Laura, and when I found out that he had been lying to me about working overtime so he could sneak off and see her, I was tempted to break everything off. I of course thought they were sleeping together, but I gave my husband the benefit of the doubt and went through their texts. Surprisingly, he had no problem with this, and when I did go through the messages, there was no sign of infidelity. And the reason my husband was spending more time with her recently was because it was the time frame of Laura's older sister's 5-year death anniversary, and around this period Laura always became extremely depressed. This actually calmed me down, and although I was definitely hurt by the fact that my husband would not tell me the truth about what he was doing, I could accept the fact that he was just being a great friend. Some time went by and things were okay, but then my husband invited me to Laura's mother's birthday. I was okay with this, and actually quite excited because I wanted to make more female friends and have girls' nights out to relieve my work stress, and figured that maybe I could meet some girls there. So, I walked into the house with my husband expecting a simple meeting, and then Laura did something I have never seen her do in the times that me and her and my husband have hung out. She literally ran to him happily and immediately wrapped her whole body around his arm and dragged him off to the garden without even saying hello to me. My husband didn't even come to get me or anything after being dragged away, so I went to the kitchen to ask for a drink where I was greeted by Laura's mother. She is a lovely person. We generally had a nice talk about our own lives and she made sure I felt welcome. The whole gathering was mainly nothing special till it got to the dinner. I sat down next to my husband and Laura walked up to me and asked me to move. I asked why since the only other spot available was next to her uncle and mother, and since it was about her mother, wouldn't she want to sit next to her? Laura replied to the question with, "Because I want to sit next to him." I turned to my husband looking for support, and he caught me totally off guard and just nodded, telling me to move, saying that I was being childish and making a scene about seating. At this point, I generally felt my blood boiling because it was so obvious what Laura was doing and my husband was just going along with it. I stood up and told my husband that I felt uncomfortable and that I need to go to the bathroom and asked where it was. Laura told me, and I left the table doing breathing exercises trying to calm down. I ended up messaging my brother from the bathroom and he said I was being jealous and that I was overreacting. So I agreed and went back to the table to sit next to Laura's mother. The whole time my husband and Laura were laughing, and it seemed that everything he said was funny to her, and she kept rubbing his back, touching his arms and saying how strong he had gotten, and she would look at me smugly. The breaking point to all of this was when I put a bit of meat onto my plate and she said, "Are you really going to eat all of that?" And I froze in embarrassment while my husband and her laughed at this supposed joke of hers. Her mother stood up for me saying that was inappropriate and to treat guests with respect, but she ignored it. Laura is very pretty and slim and works out, so coming from her it hurt a lot. I stood up from my chair and walked out the front door and called my dad. I told him to pick me up and that I'll explain why in the car. When I got in the car, I broke down and told him everything. He said I was most likely overreacting, but the situation was very odd and that I'm welcome to stay with him for the time being. I thanked him and went back to our house. While I was getting comfortable, my phone flooded up with messages from my husband and Laura. I read the messages, and to my horror, my husband was saying I ruined the whole dinner and that he was going to stay there for the night. I then read what Laura said, saying I had ruined her night because of my pick-me behavior. After doing research on that word, it's only filled me up with more anger because I realized that she was the definition of a pick-me. My husband came home around 5 p.m. from Laura's, and I immediately said that leaving your wife and staying at another woman's house was disgusting, and he started shouting that I'm overreacting again and that I need to go to counseling for my jealousy issues. For about a month, my husband got more distant and cold, and I could feel that our argument wedged a gap in our marriage. Things were definitely on the downhill slope, and although we were not having arguments or anything of the sort, I could feel that things were very tense around the house. We barely spoke, we definitely did not have intimacy, and I had to deal with him running off to Laura's about once per week. I bit my tongue, however, and held off, hoping that this was just some time frame within our marriage and hoping for a light at the end of the tunnel. That was, until I got a message from Laura with a positive pregnancy result and a threat saying we should get divorced because it's my husband's. I completely froze and honestly had no idea how to react. My husband came home around 6 p.m. that day, to where he threw his keys on the side and went upstairs without saying anything to me. I thought this was a little rude and I walked up after him telling him we needed to talk, but he said he was tired and needed to sleep, which just made me angry because I was serious. I was borderline crying by this point because I felt so neglected, but I managed to hold my tears in for the time being. I told him halfway up the stairs that I knew about him and Laura, and I expected him to look like a deer in headlights. But to my surprise, he then looked at me confused. I went on to explain my side and the text and what it seemed like, and he ended up laughing in my face. This filled me up with so much petty rage because I had had enough of being walked on, so I pushed past him into our room and got a suitcase from under the bed and started to pack his stuff for him. He started shouting at me saying really horrible things, but I didn't hear most of it since I was crying uncontrollably and busy ramming every item of clothing he